The day began like any other in our small northern Italian town. Cobblestone streets glistened with morning dew, and the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery around the corner. But despite the idyllic morning, a storm brewed inside my heart. For weeks, I had noticed small, unsettling shifts in my son Marco's behavior since he married Alina. At first, I tried to convince myself that these changes were natural. After all, marriage brought adjustments. But instinct, the kind that rises from the deepest corners of a mother's heart, refused to let me ignore it. From the moment Alina entered our home, there was a subtle tension, a shadow that clung to the edges of every interaction. The woman was polite, charming even, yet something about the way she moved, the slight glimmer of control in her eyes, the carefully calculated smile, unsettled me. Marco, the son I had raised with so much care and love, seemed to be slipping from me, slowly, almost imperceptibly, day by day. He returned from work one evening, the late autumn sun dipping behind gray clouds. I watched him closely as he entered, noting how his shoulders slumped just slightly, how his voice carried a note of hesitancy. It was subtle, but I recognized it immediately. "Marco, how was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, almost casual, though my chest tightened with apprehension. He forced a small smile. "It was fine, Mom. Busy, that's all." His eyes flickered toward Alina, who had just entered behind him. Her presence was magnetic, yet unnerving. I noticed Marco's reaction, an almost imperceptible flinch, a hesitation that he tried to mask. Elena's eyes met mine briefly, and though her smile remained, there was a calculating edge, a subtle warning hidden beneath the charm. The next few days brought mounting evidence, small rituals, faint smells of herbs and incense, objects placed deliberately in corners or arranged in unusual patterns. At first, I dismissed them as coincidental, trivial, but deep inside, I knew better. Every mother knows when something is wrong, even if the world tells her otherwise. I started documenting everything meticulously, notes on Marco's behavior, photos of unusual arrangements in the home, and detailed observations of Elena's interactions with him. She would casually suggest actions, words, or thoughts, and Marco would respond without question, almost robotically, as though guided by an unseen force. It was subtle, insidious, and horrifying in its effectiveness. One evening, I decided to confront Elena. I knew it was dangerous, but the weight of uncertainty and the fear for my son's well-being left me no choice. "Elena," I said softly, trying to maintain a calm exterior, "I need to ask you something. I've noticed changes in Marco, unusual behavior. I need you to be honest with me." Her smile did not waver, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something cold. "Margaret, you worry too much," she said smoothly. "Marco is my husband. He trusts me. You should trust him, too. Everything else is just your imagination." A chill ran through me. Her words were calm, yet there was an invisible weight, a subtle pressure meant to silence me. But instinct screamed at me something dark was at work, deliberate and hidden. That night, I lay awake, listening to faint sounds coming from their room, whispers, quiet movements, the soft rustling of objects. Every fiber of my being screamed that my son was in danger. The manipulation was deliberate. He was being influenced, slowly, systematically, in ways I could not yet fully understand. Over the next few weeks, my fears intensified. Marco became distant, distracted, and at times almost unrecognizable. He seemed to second-guess himself, hesitant to make decisions he once would have handled confidently. Even small conversations revealed cracks in his judgment. Subtle confusion seeded by Elena's presence. Neighbors began to hint at unusual occurrences as well. "Have you noticed Marco acting strange?" one whispered discreetly. Another mentioned seeing Elena place objects in odd formations around the apartment. The fragments all pointed toward the same conclusion: deliberate manipulation designed to isolate him from his family, to reshape his thoughts, and to control him in ways that were both subtle and profound. I felt helpless at times, but I could not turn away. My maternal instincts demanded vigilance. Every gesture, every phrase, every object had to be scrutinized. I collected notes, photographs, and accounts from neighbors, building a meticulous record of Elena's subtle but dangerous influence. One afternoon, as Marco returned from work, I tried to engage him in conversation about ordinary topics, friends, plans. His answers were curt, hesitant. His eyes betrayed confusion, a flicker of doubt that had not been present before. Alina appeared beside him, casual, smiling, yet every movement seemed designed to maintain control. I realized with a sinking heart that it was already too late in some ways. The patterns were entrenched, and Marco's trust in Alina had begun to overshadow his clarity, his autonomy, but I refused to give up. Step by step, I would uncover the truth, no matter how subtle, no matter how hidden. My son's mind and heart were slipping away, but I would fight to reclaim him. I whispered quietly to myself, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla's stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. That night, I watched Marco sleep, sensing the invisible threads that had been woven around him, the black rituals, the subtle manipulations, the influence that had been hidden in plain sight. Of it loomed like a storm on the horizon, and I knew, deep in my heart, that the coming days would demand courage, strategy, and unwavering persistence. The battle for my son's mind, his clarity, and our family's trust had only just begun. The early morning sun barely broke through the thick clouds over our small Italian town. The streets, slick from overnight rain, reflected the muted gray light, making the world appear fragile and uncertain. Inside my apartment, the atmosphere was heavy, charged with tension and unease. Marco had been increasingly distant, and Elena's influence over him had become more apparent in subtle, chilling ways. For days, I had observed quietly, documenting everything I could, odd arrangements of objects in our home, faint scents of incense and herbs, and whispered conversations that Marco seemed to absorb without question. Each small observation added to a growing picture, a tapestry of manipulation I was only beginning to understand. That morning, I decided to take a bolder step. I couldn't simply watch anymore. I needed proof. Carefully, I moved through the apartment, pretending to busy myself with household chores, while keeping a watchful eye on every movement and gesture. Alina appeared in the kitchen, humming softly, her presence seemingly benign. But my instincts told me otherwise. I knew that beneath her calm exterior, something dangerous was at work. I waited until she left for a brief errand, giving me a window of opportunity. Slowly, I approached Marco's studio room. He rarely locked. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the handle and pushed the door open. What I found inside made my breath catch. The room was arranged with deliberate precision. Candles in strange colors were placed at the corners of the desk. Symbols, intricate and unfamiliar, were drawn in patterns on small pieces of paper scattered across the floor. Bowls of herbs, their pungent aroma filling the air, sat beside old photographs of Marco and me. Every detail screamed of ritualistic intent, of a deliberate attempt to influence and control. I approached cautiously, documenting everything with my phone and notebook. Every candle, every symbol, every note was a piece of evidence, proof that Alina was not only manipulating Marco's thoughts but actively performing rituals to bind him to her will. I felt a chill run down my spine. The woman I had welcomed into our family was deliberately reshaping the man I loved most. Marco returned unexpectedly, and I froze, unsure if he had seen me or understood the significance of the discovery. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain calm. "Marco, look at this. Look at what's been happening while you've been distracted. This isn't normal, it's deliberate. Elena has been using these rituals to influence you." His eyes widened slightly, but he did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, noticing the candles, the symbols, and the scattered notes. Recognition flickered in his gaze, a momentary clarity that seemed to shake him from his confusion. Alina returned shortly after, unaware of the confrontation unfolding. She paused at the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "What is going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with tension. I stood my ground, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me. "Alina, I've seen everything. The rituals, the arrangements, the influence you've been exerting over Marco. I cannot allow this to continue. He is my son, and I will protect him from manipulation." Her expression flickered, a shadow passing over her carefully composed demeanor. She stepped closer, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Marco trusts me. You're overreacting. This is just harmless tradition, nothing more." Marco finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Mom's right. I've felt strange. Different things I used to know, decisions I used to make icily. I've questioned them, I don't understand why. His eyes met mine, a silent plea for guidance and reassurance. I moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Marco, what you've been feeling is real. These rituals are not harmless, they are designed to influence your mind, your emotions, and your decisions. Step by step, we will reclaim clarity and restore the trust and balance that has been disrupted. Elena's composure began to falter, her movements sharper, more desperate. She attempted to intervene, but Marco now recognized the inconsistencies, the deliberate patterns of her actions. He stood firm, questioning her in ways that revealed her desperation. Over the following hours, I guided Marco through every detail, every observation I had documented over the past weeks. Together, we analyzed the symbols, the herbs, the arrangements. Each revelation strengthened his understanding and weakened the hold Elena had over him. Evening. Marco was visibly clearer, his confidence returning slowly. He spoke with a voice of authority and recognition, directly confronting Elena about her actions and influence. She tried to maintain her control, but the truth was undeniable. The patterns she had woven were now exposed, and her influence could no longer hold him in the same subtle grip. Emily returned from school, sensing the tension but unaware of the full scale of the confrontation. Her innocent chatter brought a momentary lightness, a reminder of the family we were fighting to restore. Marco embraced her, a small but significant act that reflected the beginning of trust and clarity returning to his heart. As night fell over the town, I reflected on what had been uncovered. The discovery of Elena's rituals was only the first step to proof that my son had been manipulated. But the battle to reclaim him fully, to restore his autonomy and rebuild the family bond, was just beginning. I whispered quietly to myself, as I often did during these moments of reflection. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The shadows had been revealed, but the fight for Marco's mind, heart, and our family's future had only just begun. The town was shrouded in the soft gray of early morning, the mist clinging to the cobblestone streets and curling around the old buildings like ghostly fingers. From my window, I watched neighbors rushing to their daily routines, oblivious to the storm quietly building within my home. Inside, however, the atmosphere was tense and heavy. Marco had begun to regain fragments of clarity, but Elena's influence was still present, subtle and insidious. I knew that seeing it firsthand and gathering undeniable evidence was the only way to ensure my son's safety. For days, I had prepared, documenting observations meticulously, ensuring that nothing would be overlooked. Every ritual object, every symbol, every whispered instruction had to be recorded. This was not just about confronting Elena, it was about building a clear, irrefutable picture of the manipulation that had taken hold of my son. The consequences of even a single missed detail could be devastating. I began my day quietly, pretending to busy myself with household chores while my ears and eyes stayed sharp. Marco had left for work, leaving Elena alone in the apartment's a perfect window to investigate further. I carefully moved into the study, the room that had first revealed Elena's rituals to me. The familiar scent of incense lingered, stronger now, almost pungent in its intensity. Candles in unusual colors still occupied their corners, arranged with geometric precision. Symbols, intricate and unfamiliar, were scattered across the desk and floor. Bowls of herbs, carefully placed, filled the air with a subtle, earthy aroma that made my stomach tighten. I photographed everything, labeling each item and noting the times I had observed Marco's reactions to these arrangements. Each small detail added to the growing archive a meticulous record of Elena's manipulations. I copied notes, documented patterns, and cross-referenced them with behaviors I had observed over the past weeks. The deeper I delved, the clearer the extent of her influence became. Just as I was finishing, I heard the faint click of the door. Elena had returned unexpectedly. I froze, unsure if she had noticed me. Her eyes scanned the room, narrowing slightly. And then, with practiced calm, she said, "Margaret, what are you doing here?" I straightened, forcing calm into my voice. "I'm just tidying up, but I noticed some things I don't understand, Elena. These arrangements, these herbs, the symbols, what are they for?" Her smile was polite, but carried a tension beneath the surface. "Margaret, you're imagining things. Marco trusts me, and these are harmless traditions, nothing more." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not imagining things. I've watched, observed, and documented everything. These are not harmless. They are influencing Marco, shaping his decisions, and changing him. I cannot allow this to continue. Her composure faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of anger or perhaps fear passing across her features. Marco is my husband, she said, her voice tight. He is my responsibility. You have no right to interfere. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I have every right, Alina. He is my son, and I will protect him. Step by step, we will reclaim his clarity and restore our family. At that moment, Marco returned from work earlier than expected. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of the study, the meticulous notes, and the arrangements on the desk. Recognition flickered across his face. Mom, I think I understand now, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and clarity. Alina stepped closer, her movements defensive. Marco, listen to me. You're making a mistake. This isn't what you think. Marco looked directly at her, his voice firmer than it had been in weeks. No, Alina, I've seen the patterns. I've noticed the rituals, the arrangements, the subtle manipulations. I need to understand, and I need truth. I guided him through the evidence carefully, explaining each ritual, each symbol, and its likely influence on his thoughts and actions. Step by step, he began to see the threads of manipulation that had entangled him. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding, and a subtle but undeniable determination began to replace the lingering fog of influence. Alina, sensing her hold slipping, grew increasingly agitated. Her words, once smooth and confident, now faltered. She attempted to distract Marco, deflect, and regain control. But he now recognized the inconsistencies, the deliberate actions, and the manipulations. His trust in her words diminished with every passing moment. As the hours passed, we worked quietly together. Marco analyzed the evidence, cross-referenced his behaviors with the documented patterns, and slowly reconstructed the clarity that Alina had obscured. Each revelation strengthened him, while simultaneously weakening her subtle power. Emily returned from school, her presence bringing light and normalcy into the tense environment. Marco embraced her, and I could see in his eyes a genuine warmth, a return to the father-daughter bond that had been eroded by manipulation. The simple act of holding Emily, of sharing a smile with her, was a testament to his progress and growing awareness. By late evening, I realized that while we had uncovered the evidence, the path ahead would be treacherous. Elena's influence was dangerous precisely because it had been woven subtly into daily life. Leaving my son partially unaware of the manipulation, step by step, we would need to dismantle it completely, ensuring that his autonomy and the family's trust were fully restored. I whispered quietly to myself, as I often did during these moments of reflection, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The battle had begun in earnest. The evidence was in hand. Marco was regaining clarity, and Elena's influence was no longer invisible. But the most challenging part, the full confrontation and reclaiming of our family, was still ahead. The night settled over the town, quiet but heavy with anticipation. The shadows had been revealed, but the fight to restore light, trust, and clarity was only just beginning. The sun barely pierced through the thick morning fog that clung to the cobblestone streets of our small northern Italian town. The world outside seemed quiet, ordinary, even serene, but inside our apartment, tension simmered like a storm ready to break. The last few days had revealed Elena's manipulations in frightening detail, and Marco had begun to regain fragments of clarity. Yet her influence, subtle and persistent, was far from gone. Today, the confrontation would escalate, and the full truth would start to unfold. I awoke early, careful not to alert Alina to my movements. The scent of lingering incense still hung faintly in the air, a ghost of her rituals, but I had documented every trace meticulously. Every pattern, every symbol, every arrangement of candles and herbs had been catalogued. My notes were exhaustive, detailing how each subtle act had been used to manipulate Marco's thoughts, behavior, and emotions. Marco remained in his room, still partially under Elena's influence. Though he had begun to question the inconsistencies he'd noticed, I knew I needed to act carefully. Any misstep could alert Alina, causing her to tighten her grip further or manipulate him against me. My strategy was simple but painstaking: gather undeniable proof, reinforce Marco's clarity, and confront Alina when her influence had weakened enough to be undeniable. I began by reviewing all my notes with Marco. Look at this, Marco, I said quietly, pointing to a series of photographs showing candles arranged in specific patterns and symbols drawn in places you'd never expect someone to notice. These aren't just random decorations, they're deliberate. Every placement, every pattern, is meant to influence your thoughts. Look at the timing of each ritual. Notice how it coincides with moments when you felt confused, hesitant, or uncertain. He leaned closer, brow furrowed. I didn't realize, but when I look at it now, it makes sense. I remember feeling odd, distracted, even unsure of things I used to know well. It's terrifying. I nodded, holding his hand gently. Yes, Marco, that's exactly why we need to act carefully. We must understand everything before confronting her. If you are aware, you can resist her influence, you can reclaim your mind, your decisions, and your family's trust. Alina appeared in the kitchen, her movements casual but alert. She spoke with practiced warmth, a voice designed to disarm suspicion. Marco, have you spoken to your mother? Again, I hope you're not letting her fill your head with unnecessary worries. Marco met her gaze steadily. I'm learning the truth, Alina. I see the patterns now. I remember the times I felt controlled or uncertain, and I understand why. Her composure faltered ever so slightly. What do you mean? She asked, though her tone carried a hint of alarm beneath the calm. I moved closer, careful to maintain a neutral tone. Alina, the evidence is clear. The rituals, the arrangements, the herbs, the symbols, they're designed to manipulate Marco. You've been influencing him subtly, but it's no longer hidden. Marco can see it, and we cannot allow it to continue. For a moment, she looked at us both, her eyes narrowing. This is ridiculous, she said, though her voice betrayed tension. You're overreacting, Marco. Trust me, this isn't what you think. Marco's gaze hardened. No, Alina, I see it. I've seen it all, and I cannot let it control me any longer. I will not be manipulated. I want clarity, truth, and honesty. This ends now. The confrontation intensified over the next hour. Every argument Alina tried to make, every attempt to redirect or distract, was met with clarity and calm reasoning from Marco and me. We walked through each piece of evidence, every ritual, and the behavioral patterns I had meticulously documented. Marco questioned her directly, forcing her to reveal the inconsistencies and desperation in her explanations. Alina's composure finally broke. Her voice rose slightly, her hands trembled, and the smooth confidence she had maintained for months evaporated. You don't understand. I only wanted what's best for him. You're twisting everything. Marco's expression was resolute. No, Alina, I understand perfectly. This is manipulation, and it's harmful. I will not let it continue. I will decide for myself, and I will protect my family from influence like this. The evening grew darker outside, shadows stretching across the apartment. Emily returned from school, her laughter a stark contrast to the storm of tension in the apartment. Marco embraced her, holding her close. The warmth and natural bond between father and daughter was restored in that simple moment. I watched them, my heart swelling with relief. But the confrontation was not over. Alina, now desperate, attempted subtle psychological tactics, pleading, guilt, and attempts to undermine Marco's confidence. Each time, he countered, his growing clarity evident. He had begun reclaiming autonomy, seeing the patterns that had ensnared him for months. I reflected quietly on the journey so far. The weeks of observation, documentation, confrontation, and emotional support. The subtle manipulations had been devastating, yet patience, meticulous evidence gathering, and clear guidance had begun to dismantle them. Step by step, the fog of influence was lifting. That night, I whispered quietly, as I often did during moments of reflection. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The storm was far from over, but the first cracks had appeared in Elena's carefully constructed control. Marco's clarity was growing, our family's bond was slowly restoring, and the shadows that had haunted us were beginning to recede. The battle for truth, trust, and freedom had escalated, and the coming days would demand courage, vigilance, and unwavering determination. The early morning air in our small Italian town was crisp and cold, a gentle reminder of the approaching winter. Outside, the streets were quiet, save for the distant footsteps of neighbors hurrying to their daily routines. Inside our apartment, the tension was palpable. The confrontation with Alina over her rituals had begun to fracture her influence. But the battle for Marco's clarity was far from over. Today would mark a turning point, a decisive moment where truth and manipulation would collide. I awoke early, my mind racing with strategies and careful plans. I knew that exposing Alina fully required patience, observation, and an unwavering focus on protecting Marco. The subtle manipulations she had woven into his daily life had been effective, precisely because they were nearly invisible. Step by step, I had begun dismantling them. But I needed to ensure that Marco could resist her attempts at regaining control. Marco had begun to regain his awareness, but fragments of doubt still lingered. He questioned moments of confusion, hesitated in decisions he once made effortlessly, and occasionally faltered when Alina attempted subtle manipulation. My task was to reinforce his clarity, provide tangible evidence, and ensure he could trust his own judgment. As the morning progressed, I carefully reviewed the documentation I had gathered: photographs of rituals, notes on herbs and symbols, detailed accounts of behavioral manipulation, and observations from neighbors. Every detail had been meticulously recorded, a testament to the subtle yet pervasive influence Alina had wielded. "Marco," I said quietly, as he joined me in the study, "we need to go through this together. I want you to see everything clearly, step by step, so that nothing can confuse or manipulate you again." He nodded, his expression serious but determined. "I'm ready, Mom. I want to understand it all. I want clarity, no matter how painful it is." We began systematically reviewing each piece of evidence. I explained the significance of each ritual, the arrangement of candles, the symbols, and the herbs. I pointed out patterns, coincidences that were far too consistent to be accidental, and moments where Marco had unknowingly reacted under Elena's influence. "This," I said, holding up a photograph of a candle arrangement on the desk, "was placed here on the morning you began doubting yourself about the project at work. Notice how it coincided with your sudden hesitation and the confusion you felt about decisions you usually make. Is it?" Marco's brow furrowed as he examined the photo. I remember that day. I couldn't understand why I was second-guessing myself. It felt unnatural, like I was being pulled in a direction I didn't want to go. I continued, pointing to symbols drawn in subtle patterns. These were placed strategically. Each one is designed to influence thought patterns and emotions. Combined with the herbs, they create an environment that subtly alters perception and behavior. He swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and realization crossing his face. I can't believe I didn't notice it sooner, but now, I see it. I understand why I felt trapped, confused. I nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Exactly. Recognition is the first step toward freedom. Now that you see it, you can resist it. You can reclaim your thoughts, decisions, and emotions." Alina returned home later that day, unaware that Marco had begun to fully understand her influence. She moved through the apartment, attempting to project calm, warmth, and authority. But the subtle cracks in her composure were evident. Her eyes flickered nervously as she glanced at Marco, who now met her gaze with newfound clarity and firmness. "Marco, why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice tight but controlled. "I see it now, Alina," he replied, his tone steady and resolute. "I see the manipulations, the patterns, and the influence you've exerted over me. I understand everything, and I will not allow it to control me anymore." Her expression faltered, her carefully constructed calm beginning to crumble. "Marco, this is absurd. You don't understand. I only wanted what's best for you." "No, Alina," he said firmly. "This was not about what's best for me. This was about control, subtle manipulation, rituals, and influence designed to make me doubt myself and depend on you. But I see it now, and it ends today." I watched silently, my heart pounding with relief and anticipation. Marco's clarity had grown beyond what I had dared hope for. The combination of evidence, patient guidance, and his own recognition of inconsistencies had allowed him to reclaim his mind and decisions. Elena's attempts to interject, to manipulate subtly, were met with immediate recognition and resistance. Every word, gesture, and suggestion was analyzed and rejected. Marco was no longer a passive participant. He was fully aware, fully in control, and fully able to confront her influence. As the day wore on, Emily returned from school, bringing the light and innocence that reminded us of what we were fighting to protect. Marco embraced her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine warmth, trust, and connection between father and daughter. Their bond, tested and strained by manipulation, was now beginning to heal. The evening settled over the apartment, casting long shadows across the rooms. Elena, realizing that her influence was dismantled, attempted to retreat, both physically and psychologically. She knew that her carefully woven web had been exposed, her subtle control broken. I reflected quietly, thinking of the weeks of observation, careful documentation, and patient guidance that had led to this moment. The battle for Marco's clarity had been arduous, emotionally exhausting, and fraught with tension, but it was succeeding. Step by step, the shadows of manipulation were receding, and the light of understanding, truth, and family bonds was returning. I whispered quietly to myself, as I often did during moments of reflection, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The turning point had been reached. Marco had recognized the manipulation, confronted Elena, and reclaimed his autonomy. The shadows were retreating, and while the journey to restore complete trust and clarity was not yet over, the most critical battle had been won. The family's bond, tested by deception and influence, was now resilient, stronger than ever, and ready to face the final steps toward full restoration. The morning light seeped through the curtains of our small northern Italian apartment, casting long shadows across the walls. The streets outside were quiet, wrapped in a blanket of fog that made the town feel suspended in time. Inside, however, the tension was palpable. Yesterday's confrontations had weakened Elena's influence over Marco, but today would be decisive. Today, the truth would be fully exposed, leaving no room for doubt, deception, or manipulation. I awoke early, my mind racing with strategies. The weeks of observation, documentation, and subtle guidance had led to this critical moment. Marco had begun to see through the carefully woven web of rituals, manipulations, and psychological influence Elena had exerted over him. Now, the final step was to make her fully accountable, to ensure that the control she had exercised could never be reclaimed. I carefully prepared the apartment, arranging the evidence in a way that would be indisputable. Candles, herbs, symbols, photographs, and detailed notes were spread across the study desk. Each item told a story, each placement a piece of undeniable proof. Marco stood beside me, a mixture of apprehension and determination in his eyes. His voice, once hesitant and controlled by Elena's subtle manipulations, now carried clarity and resolve. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm ready. I want this to end. I want the truth fully revealed, and I want to reclaim everything that's been taken from me." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride and hope. "We will do this together, Marco. Step by step, we'll dismantle her influence completely." Elena returned later that morning, unaware that we had prepared for her full exposure. She moved through the apartment with a practiced air of calm, attempting to maintain her usual composure. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the study, noting the unusual arrangement of objects, but she dismissed it with a small, confident smile. "Good morning, everyone," she said smoothly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Marco stepped forward, his gaze firm. "Elena, we need to talk. Everything you've done, every subtle manipulation, every ritual, every influence over MIT, ends now. The truth is out, and I will not allow it to continue." Her smile faltered, a flicker of panic crossing her features. "Marco, what are you talking about?" I gestured toward the desk, where the meticulously documented evidence lay in plain view. "Elena, this is what we're talking about. Candles, arranged in specific patterns, symbols drawn with intent, herbs, and rituals all designed to influence Marco. This is the full extent of your manipulation, and it cannot continue." She took a step back, attempting to maintain her composure. "This is absurd. You're twisting everything. I only wanted what's best for him." Marco's voice was steady and unwavering. "No, Elena, this was never about what's best for me. This was about control. Every action, every suggestion, every ritual was intended to manipulate my thoughts and decisions. I see it now, and I will not allow it to continue." I watched Elena closely, noting the subtle shifts in her demeanor. The confidence she had maintained for months had begun to crumble. Her voice, once smooth and persuasive, now wavered. Her movements became tense, calculated, and defensive. The carefully constructed facade of control had been shattered. Over the next several hours, we went through the evidence methodically. Marco reviewed each photograph, each note, each arrangement of objects. He questioned every inconsistency, every subtle manipulation. Alina attempted to interject, to redirect, to assert control, but Marco now recognized every tactic. His clarity was unshakable, his resolve undeniable. Neighbors who had previously whispered about unusual occurrences were brought into the fold, providing first-hand accounts of objects moving inexplicably, strange patterns, and odd behavior that corroborated our evidence. The combined testimonies left Alina with no room for denial. By late afternoon, her attempts to defend herself had completely failed. The subtle manipulations once hidden in plain sight were now fully exposed. Marco, guided by evidence, understanding, and his regained clarity, confronted her with every detail, leaving no doubt about her actions. Emily, observing from the side, could sense the tension but did not fully understand the gravity of the confrontation. Marco knelt to embrace her, holding her close. The warmth, trust, and natural bond between father and daughter had been restored, a stark contrast to the months of subtle manipulation that had strained their relationship. As evening approached, Elena's composure had entirely collapsed. She had attempted every psychological tactic at her disposal, pleading, guilt, manipulation, but each was met with recognition and resistance. Marco's autonomy was fully restored, and he could see clearly the subtle patterns that had once controlled him. I reflected quietly on the journey so far, the weeks of observation, documentation, and careful guidance, the emotional turmoil, fear, and tension, the painstaking work required to reclaim clarity and autonomy. It had been exhausting, emotionally taxing, and fraught with uncertainty, but we had succeeded. I whispered to myself quietly, as I often did in moments of reflection, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The exposure was complete. Elena's influence had been dismantled, Marco's clarity fully restored, and our family's bond was beginning to heal. The shadows of manipulation had been revealed, the storm had broken, and the path toward restoration and trust was finally visible. Tonight, as we gathered together, a tentative calm settled over the apartment. We had faced deception, manipulation, and fear, and we had emerged stronger, united, and aware. The road ahead would require continued vigilance, patience, and care, but the most critical battle had been won. Truth had prevailed, autonomy had been reclaimed, and the family's bonds were ready to be rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The first rays of sunlight stretched over the quiet streets of our northern Italian town, illuminating the cobblestones with a soft, golden glow. Inside our apartment, the atmosphere was still tense, yet charged with a different energy, one of cautious relief, hope, and the fragile beginnings of healing. The previous confrontation had left Alina exposed, her influence over Marco dismantled, but the emotional scars remained. Today, the real work would begin, rebuilding trust, strengthening our family bonds, and reclaiming the warmth and unity that had been strained by manipulation. Marco sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring pensively out of the window. His mind, once clouded with subtle influence, was now clear, but the process of understanding what had been done to him, of piecing together the months of manipulation, weighed heavily. I joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Marco, I said softly, I know this is difficult. What Alina did, it was deliberate, subtle, and harmful, but you've reclaimed your clarity, and that's something extraordinary. Step by step, we'll rebuild trust and restore what was lost. He turned to me, his eyes glistening with a mixture of gratitude and lingering pain. Mom, it's overwhelming. I didn't realize how much control she had over me. Even small decisions, small doubts, they were influenced. And now, I'm left questioning myself, my own instincts. I nodded, understanding completely. That's natural. The mind takes time to recover from manipulation. But recognizing it is the first step. Every moment you trust yourself again, every decision you make independently, is a victory. The following days were dedicated to careful reflection and emotional rebuilding. Marco and I revisited the evidence together, not to dwell on the past, but to solidify his understanding and reinforce his autonomy. We analyzed each ritual, each subtle manipulation, and discussed how to prevent similar influences in the future. This was not merely about exposing Alana, it was about strengthening Marco's capacity to recognize and resist undue influence, reclaiming control over his own thoughts and decisions. Emily, too, became an important part of this process. Her presence brought light and warmth into our home, reminding us of the simple, genuine joys of family life. We spent afternoons together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of connection that had been strained during the months of manipulation. Her innocence and trust became a beacon of hope, a reminder of what we were fighting to restore. One evening, Marco and I sat together in the study, reviewing the timeline of events. "I remember now," he said quietly, "how subtle it all was, the ways she suggested things, planted ideas, and created small doubts. I thought it was just me being indecisive, but now I see it was her influence shaping everything." I nodded solemnly. "Yes, Marco. Manipulation like this works best when it's nearly invisible. It preys on trust, subtly alters perceptions, and creates doubt, but now you see it clearly. Your awareness is the shield that protects you." We discussed strategies for maintaining boundaries and reinforcing clarity. Marco committed to open communication, careful reflection, and immediate awareness of subtle influences. These conversations were not easy. They involved acknowledging vulnerability, admitting past unawareness, and accepting the emotional impact of manipulation. Yet each discussion strengthened his resolve and deepened our bond. Alina, meanwhile, had withdrawn from our lives, her influence completely dismantled. The confrontation had left her with no room for denial, and her attempts at manipulation had failed entirely. Marco's clarity and understanding rendered her tactics ineffective. While we did not pursue further conflict, her absence allowed space for healing, reflection, and rebuilding. I reflected on the months of tension, fear, and uncertainty. The subtle manipulations, the psychological games, and the rituals had tested our family in ways I had never imagined. But the experience also revealed our resilience, patience, and unwavering commitment to truth and trust. Step by step, we had reclaimed clarity, exposed deception, and restored autonomy. In the following weeks, Marco's confidence continued to grow. He made decisions independently, reflected critically on suggestions and advice, and engaged openly with both Emily and me. The bond between father and daughter strengthened daily, built on genuine trust, shared experiences, and renewed understanding. Our family meals, once tense and overshadowed by manipulation, now became moments of warmth, laughter, and reconnection. One afternoon, as we shared a quiet moment in the kitchen, Marco spoke softly. "Mom, I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly. It's still difficult to trust completely, but I understand now how delicate influence can be, and I'm grateful that you guided me through this, helped me recognize the truth, and never gave up." I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of relief, pride, and deep emotional resonance. "Marco, it's always been about protecting you, guiding you, and helping you reclaim your life. The strength you've shown, the clarity you've gained, it's extraordinary. And our family, we will continue to rebuild together." As evening descended over the town, I took a moment for quiet reflection. The past months had been a whirlwind of suspicion, discovery, confrontation, and emotional turbulence. We had faced manipulation, subtle influence, and the erosion of trust, but we had emerged stronger, more aware, and more resilient. I whispered quietly to myself, as I often did, "If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to my stories." I share stories that come straight from the heart. The shadows of deception had been lifted, replaced by the light of clarity, understanding, and love. Our family bond, tested by manipulation and subtle influence, was now fortified. We had learned painful but invaluable lessons about vigilance, trust, and the importance of clear communication. Step by step, we had rebuilt what had been broken, reclaiming autonomy, trust, and the warmth of genuine familial connection. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clearer sky, a renewed sense of purpose, and a resilient family ready to face the future together. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of gold and pink over our quiet northern Italian town. The streets, still damp from last night's rain, shimmered in the early light. Inside our apartment, a sense of calm had begun to settle, a calm earned through weeks of tension, confrontation, and painstaking effort to dismantle Elena's influence over Marco. Today was about moving forward, about the final steps toward complete restoration of our family's bonds, trust, and emotional equilibrium. Marco rose early, joining me in the kitchen as I prepared breakfast. The atmosphere, though still tinged with the remnants of past tension, felt lighter. There were no whispered manipulations, no subtle influences, no lingering shadows. Instead, there was a quiet awareness, a mindfulness that came from hard-won clarity. Mom, Marco said softly, stirring his coffee. I think I'm finally understanding how fragile influence can be. It's frightening how subtle it was. But I feel stronger, not clearer, more aware. I smiled gently. That clarity is the foundation. Now comes the work of reinforcing it, making it part of daily life so that manipulation, subtle or otherwise, can never take root again. The day was spent in reflection and deliberate action. Marco and I revisited every corner of the apartment, every ritual object, every arrangement that had once been a tool of influence. Candles, herbs, and symbols were removed systematically, each discarded item representing a small victory over manipulation. Each removal was an act of reclaiming autonomy, a tangible demonstration that the shadows of control could no longer touch our family. Emily joined us, her laughter filling the spaces that had once been tense and shadowed. We included her in the process not because she understood the full depth of what had occurred, but because rebuilding trust and emotional bonds required shared effort. Together, we cleared the apartment of lingering influences, creating a home environment grounded in clarity, openness, and genuine connection. Marco took an active role, organizing and cataloging the evidence we had collected over the past weeks. He reviewed photographs, notes, and documented behaviors not as a reminder of trauma, but as a record of lessons learned, a testament to resilience, awareness, and vigilance. Each action reinforced his autonomy and strengthened the bond between us. Later in the day, we shared a family meal, something that had once been fraught with tension and subtle manipulation. The table was simple, but the atmosphere was warm. Laughter, conversation, and genuine engagement flowed naturally. Marco and Emily shared stories from their day, and I listened with pride as my son responded with clarity, humor, and attentiveness, qualities that had been obscured by months of influence but were now fully restored. Mom, Marco said between bites, I can see now how manipulation works, not just rituals, but subtle words, gestures, and suggestions. It's like a cloud that slowly obscures clarity, but I feel free, and I know we'll be able to prevent it in the future. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief and accomplishment. Exactly. Awareness is the shield. Trust in yourself, openness with each other, and vigilance will prevent shadows from taking root again. In the following days, we continued the process of restoration. Conversations were deliberate, open, and reflective. Marco actively questioned his assumptions, reviewed past decisions, and practiced independent judgment. Emily's presence served as both a reminder and a reinforcement of genuine emotional connection. Each moment of shared laughter, each act of honest communication, and each decision made with clarity strengthened our family's resilience. We also discussed boundaries and strategies for maintaining autonomy in the future. Marco understood that influence, subtle or overt, could arise from unexpected sources, and he committed to maintaining awareness and reflection as a part of daily life. These discussions, though emotionally taxing at times, became a cornerstone of our recovery and future stability. By evening, the apartment had transformed from a place shadowed by manipulation to a sanctuary of clarity, trust, and restored familial bonds. Marco, Emily, and I sat together, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The months of observation, confrontation, and emotional labor had culminated in this restoration of family, renewed, aware, and stronger than ever before. I feel lighter, Marco said quietly. It's like a weight has been lifted, not just the manipulation, but the uncertainty, the doubt. I feel whole again. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of shared understanding and renewed trust. Yes, Marco, that weight has been lifted, and it will remain lifted. We've learned lessons that will guide us, protect us, and ensure that our family remains strong, resilient, and connected. As night fell, I took a moment for quiet reflection. The journey had been arduous, fraught with tension, manipulation, and emotional turbulence, but the outcome was a testament to patience, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to truth and family. Shadows of control had been exposed, influence dismantled, and clarity restored. I whispered quietly to myself, as I often did, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The family had been restored, trust had been rebuilt, autonomy had been reclaimed, and in the quiet moments of reflection, I realized that our journey had not only exposed manipulation, but had fortified the bonds that truly mattered: love, clarity, and the unwavering connection between mother, son, and daughter. The storm had passed, leaving behind a family stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The lessons learned would guide us for years to come, ensuring that the light of truth, trust, and love would never again be obscured by shadows. The town lay quiet under a soft blanket of fog, its cobblestone streets glistening with the remnants of an early morning drizzle. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Inside our apartment, the atmosphere was calm, a stark contrast to the tension and manipulation that had shadowed us for months. The battles had been fought, Elena's influence dismantled, and Marco's clarity restored, yet the emotional work, the reflection, the closure, and the deep understanding of what had transpired remained essential. I sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open before me. Each day, I documented thoughts, reflections, and lessons learned, not for record keeping alone, but to internalize the wisdom gained from the ordeal. Marco joined me, holding a warm cup of coffee, his eyes thoughtful. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I understand now more than ever how manipulation works, not just the rituals, but the subtle, invisible ways someone can influence another. And I realize how important awareness and trust are, not just in others, but in myself." I smiled gently, feeling both pride and relief. "Yes, Marco, that awareness is your shield. Recognizing influence, questioning inconsistencies, and trusting your own judgment will protect you, and it will strengthen our family bond, which has proven resilient through even the darkest challenges." The morning passed slowly, filled with quiet reflection and meaningful conversation. Marco spoke openly about moments when he felt confused or indecisive, reflecting on how Elena's subtle tactics had affected him. Each recollection was paired with understanding, recognition, and reinforcement of clarity. This process, though emotionally taxing, was essential for complete emotional closure. Emily entered the room, her bright presence a reminder of the innocence and warmth that had motivated so much of our struggle. She hugged Marco tightly, her laughter breaking through the lingering shadows of tension. Marco embraced her fully, a moment of genuine connection and restored trust. "Emily," he said softly, "thank you for being patient and trusting me. I realize now how much my confusion may have affected you, and I promise to be present, clear, and honest from now on." Her eyes glistened with understanding, and she smiled. "I know, Dad. I can see you're really trying, and I'm proud of you." The afternoon was dedicated to reinforcing boundaries and strategies for maintaining autonomy. Marco and I discussed practical ways to prevent subtle influence in the future, careful reflection before making decisions, open communication about concerns, and recognition of patterns that could indicate manipulation. We documented these strategies not as rules, but as tools to ensure the family remained resilient. "Mom," Marco said, "it's amazing how subtle some of it was. Even gestures, small phrases, or minor suggestions can be manipulative if combined carefully. I never realized it could feel so natural, so invisible. But now I see it, and I feel empowered." I nodded. "That empowerment is the key. It's not just about recognizing manipulation, it's about reclaiming control over your life, your decisions, and your family's emotional well-being." Evening settled over the town, casting long, soft shadows across the apartment. Marco, Emily, and I gathered together in the living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The months of observation, confrontation, and emotional labor had been intense and challenging, but the outcomes were profound. We had reclaimed clarity, exposed deception, and strengthened our bonds. "I feel like a weight has been lifted," Marco said quietly, his voice steady and resolute. "The confusion, doubt, and subtle manipulation are gone. And while the memory of it will remain, it will serve as a lesson, a reminder of what to watch for, and how to protect myself and our family." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength of shared understanding. "Exactly. The past is a teacher. The shadows we've faced will never fully disappear from memory. but they've shown us the importance of vigilance, trust, and clarity. And most importantly, they've shown us that our family bond is resilient and enduring. That night, I took a quiet moment to reflect alone, considering the emotional journey we had endured. The subtle manipulations, the psychological tactics, and the rituals had been devastating in their precision and subtlety, yet through patience, evidence, confrontation, and unwavering support, we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. I whispered to myself, as I often did during moments of reflection, if you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The emotional closure was profound. Trust had been rebuilt, autonomy reclaimed, and the lessons learned would serve as guidance for years to come. Marco's clarity was unshakable. Emily's bond with her father had been restored, and our family's foundation had been fortified against any future influence. The journey had been long, challenging, and emotionally taxing, but it had led to a complete restoration of family, resilient, aware, and ready to face the future together. Shadows had been exposed, truth had prevailed, and love had been reaffirmed as the unbreakable bond guiding us forward. The first light of dawn filtered gently through the curtains of our apartment, illuminating the familiar, comforting details of home: the worn wooden floors, the small kitchen table, and the photographs that captured moments of laughter and connection. The town outside was waking slowly, its cobblestone streets glistening with dew, while inside, our home had transformed. The tension, fear, and manipulation that had haunted us for months had been replaced by clarity, trust, and a renewed sense of unity. Marco stood by the window, gazing at the streets below. His expression was calm, contemplative, yet filled with a quiet resolve. "Mom," he said softly, "I feel like I finally understand what we've been through. Not just the manipulation, but the resilience it took to face it, the patience, and the commitment to truth. It wasn't easy, but I see now why it was necessary." I joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, Marco. It was challenging, exhausting, and at times painful, but it taught us invaluable lessons about awareness, vigilance, and the importance of family bonds. And most importantly, it reminded us of the strength we have when we stand together." The weeks that followed were devoted to solidifying this newfound clarity and trust. Marco, Emily, and I continued to spend time together, intentionally creating an environment of openness and emotional safety. Each day, we engaged in meaningful conversations, shared experiences, and practiced transparency in decision-making. Emily, once a quiet observer of the tension that had pervaded our home, now thrived in the atmosphere of trust. Her laughter returned fully, her curiosity and joy unrestrained. She and Marco rebuilt their father-daughter bond, sharing small routines, stories, and moments of humor that had once been overshadowed by subtle manipulation. Marco's growth was equally remarkable. He approached each decision with reflection, confidence, and critical awareness. He questioned suggestions, recognized patterns of influence, and reinforced the lessons learned from the ordeal. The clarity he had regained allowed him to reclaim his autonomy fully, a transformation that was visible in every interaction, every choice, and every conversation. Alina had withdrawn from our lives entirely. Her manipulations were exposed, her subtle control dismantled, and her presence was no longer a threat to the family's emotional stability. While we did not pursue further confrontation, her absence marked the beginning of true restoration. We no longer lived under the shadow of manipulation. Instead, we lived in the light of understanding, awareness, and shared commitment to trust. I took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey we had endured, the months of subtle influence, psychological manipulation, and emotional tension had tested our family in ways I had never imagined. But through patience, careful observation, confrontation, and unwavering support, we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. Marco and I discussed strategies for maintaining vigilance and emotional resilience. We emphasized open communication, critical reflection, and trust in personal judgment. These conversations were not a response to fear, but a proactive approach to ensuring that our family remained aware, strong, and resistant to manipulation in any form. "Mom," Marco said thoughtfully, "I realize now that the lessons we've learned aren't just about Alina or her influence. They're about life, about being aware, trusting yourself, and protecting those you love. And I want to carry these lessons forward, for Emily, for me, and for our family." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. Exactly, Marco. The lessons are enduring. Awareness, vigilance, trust, and communication, they are the pillars of a strong, resilient family, and we've learned them together, through experience, challenge, and love. The final weeks were spent in quiet rebuilding, with each day reinforcing trust, understanding, and connection. Family meals became joyous gatherings filled with laughter and genuine conversation. Shared routines, small gestures of care, and honest communication strengthened bonds that had been tested but never broken. One evening, as we sat together by the window, watching the sun set over the town, Marco spoke quietly. "I feel whole again. The confusion, doubt, and fear are gone. And though the memories of manipulation will always remind me to stay vigilant, they no longer control me. I feel free, empowered, and connected." Emily leaned against him, her small hand in his. "We're together, Dad. That's what matters. And I know we'll always watch out for each other." As night fell, I reflected on the entire journey, the fear, the confrontation, the careful documentation, the emotional labor, and the eventual restoration. The experience had been exhausting and painful, but it had led to profound growth. We had learned the importance of awareness, the dangers of subtle manipulation, and the unbreakable strength of trust and love. I whispered quietly, as I often did during moments of reflection. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The storm had passed, Elena's shadow was gone, Marco's clarity and autonomy were restored, Emily's trust and joy had returned, and I realized that our family was now stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The ultimate lesson of this journey was clear. Vigilance, honesty, and unwavering love are the shields that protect us from subtle manipulation. Trust in oneself, trust in each other, and the courage to face truth, no matter how painful, are what ensured the survival and strength of a family. We had faced deception, psychological manipulation, and fear, and we had emerged not only intact, but transformed. Our bonds were fortified, our awareness sharpened, and our love unbroken. The past would serve as a guide, the lessons would endure, and our family would face the future together, resilient, united, and empowered by the strength we had discovered within ourselves and each other.